Over the years, werewolf shows have claimed their own little corner of the fantasy world, with stories built around violence, magic, and relationships, and yet vampires will steal all the attention, and rightly so, but that hardly seems fair, right? Werewolves may not have the mysterious and seductive reputation as vampires or the cunning powers of witches, but werewolves still have plenty to offer, and that is why Marvelous Videos brings this video to remind you guys that while the fantasy world has no dearth of attractive, troubled vampires, werewolves also lurk around. In this video, we are going to talk about 8 cult werewolf TV shows that you probably never knew existed, or were overshadowed by blinding vampires, maybe. Whatever the reason, these series deserves another look because vampires have owned the night for long enough. It is time to let the wolves out. Let's get with it. Werewolf, TV series 1987 to 1988. Werewolf was one of the first original and maybe coolest shows on Fox TV when it was very new to the business. Although it was short-lived, the series produced a feature-length pilot and 28 regular episodes, and fans still have only good things to say about the show even years later. The plot was straightforward and followed Eric Cord, a young American college student. However, his life changed completely after his best friend Ted bit him. Only Ted was a werewolf himself. After that bite, Eric inherited the curse of lycanthropy, and a red pentagram appeared on his hand, indicating that Eric would inevitably lose control and turn into a werewolf sooner or later. The only thing he could do to prevent it was to kill the originator of the bloodline, a mysterious someone named Janos Skorzeny. To make Eric's life worse than it already was, he was being chased by a relentless bounty hunter who believed Eric was responsible for Ted's death and a string of other murders. So now Eric had a curse he could not shake off, a monster he needed to hunt to get his old life back, and a bounty hunter on his tail, throwing every hurdle at him. Poor Eric seems a little too caught up. However, making Eric's life more pitiable, the show later revealed that even Skorzeny was not the original werewolf at all. Sadly, the show ended before Eric could find a cure for himself, and one can say the production itself had a curse. Because the show didn't end because it could not rake up the desired ratings. The show ended after its short run with its expensive werewolf effects and makeup often cited as contributing to its high production costs. And throughout the series, transformation footage was often recycled from previous episodes, which you do notice after a while. But still, it's a damn shame because this could have easily been a show with 10 seasons. And while many of us may dismiss Werewolf because of its similarity with other TV shows like The Fugitive and The Incredible Hulk, I advise you not to. Yeah, I know the format of Man on the Hunt sounds all too similar, but Werewolf is a whole lot different. In these older shows, where the hero is running from place to place, life on the road somewhat looks oddly manageable. Without any background checks and the care of leaving digital footprints in this modern world, the protagonist gets a new identity, has decent clothes, and even gets haircuts. On the other hand, you see Eric Cord. Poor guy went from a preppy American boy to a straight up worn down and dirtier derelict who had to beg for food and money. Eric wandered from one place to another, hitchhiked, took odd jobs, and met people who needed help. But he had one thing going for him. He was a good person at the core, and even when the beast took over him, the goodness in him never truly abandoned him. This is evident because even in his changed beastly form, Eric could tell the difference between a threat and an innocent, and for most of the series, did not harm the innocent. However, Eric was afraid the human in him would eventually slowly erode if he did not break away from the curse, and thus he tried holding on to his humanity as tightly and as long as he could. In his search for a cure, his girlfriend Kelly helped him and was the human anchor in his life who reminded Eric that there was still a good person under all that hair and rage. If the show had continued, maybe we could have seen Eric's humanity fading away and the show could have gone darker with it. Nevertheless, producer John Ashley assured that no matter how dark the show would be, they would not make Eric a mass murderer like Skorzeny. Unfortunately, the show didn't last long enough to explore all the potential it had. Big Wolf on Campus, TV series 1999 to 2002. Big Wolf on Campus remains a guilty pleasure for many out there. Airing on YTV in Canada and Fox Family in the United States, this Canadian series was created by Peter A. Knight and Christopher Briggs and ran for 3 seasons and 65 episodes. Thomas P. Tommy Dawkins was a high school student in Pleasantville, and his life was a long party, like most teens. He had friends, was a popular jock, and his senior year was just around the corner. Tommy had his whole fun life in front of him. However, the last outing in the woods before senior year changed it all when Tommy was bitten by a werewolf, and once senior year began, Tommy was obviously no longer his usual self. He began to change physically and gained some pretty weird abilities. While the curse of being a werewolf came with the perks of agility and strength, it had its own severe drawback when Tommy lost control of his autonomy and would change form when triggered by strong emotions. And it goes without saying that Tommy's new powers also came with a huge duty of being Pleasantville's secret protector. and of protecting the cozy suburb from dark forces. However, it was not long before Merton Dingle, the goth kid of the school, saw past Tommy and instantly knew what was going on. The Igor to Frankenstein, Merton helped Tommy navigate through the world of monsters, warlocks, and demons. And it's a treat to watch them. See, Tommy could have been written as a one-dimensional smug jock who only grew more arrogant and into a bully after he acquired his abilities, while Merton's character could have been reduced to the school weirdo who had a Ouija board at home. Instead, the two became the best of friends, despite each belonging to a completely different world. If I'm being honest, their odd couple bond even made the absurd plot work. A lot of the villains of the show served as metaphors for teen issues, which is very Buffy-coded, and if we've already trodden onto the path of comparing Buffy with the Big Wolf, this was way goofier and directed toward a much younger audience. And while Buffy was more ambitious of the two in terms of narrative, Big Wolf was made on a modest budget in Montreal. I get it when people compare it to Buffy, but the comparison only goes so far. However, if you are new to the whole genre of werewolf, this could be a good place for you to start. Also, Tommy and Merton are very easy on the eyes, so that helps. She-Wolf of London, TV series 1990 to 1991. Not to be confused with the 1946 film of the same name, the series followed Randy Wallace, an American grad student who came to London with the high hopes of studying mythology under the renowned Dr. Ian Matheson. Randy lived in Ian's parents' bed and breakfast, and naturally a romance soon blossomed between them. But while researching for her thesis out on the moor, Randy is attacked by a vicious beast. Soon Randy had lycanthropy, and the only person she could confide in was Ian. Lucky for her, the one person who knew her secret also happened to be an expert on the occult and paranormal. Now, what I really appreciate about She-Wolf of London is that it takes a completely different route from the usual done-to-death ways in treating lycanthropy. I mean, no two werewolves are hardly ever the same. While a few lycanthropes leave a mark of the beast on their palm, as we saw in Werewolf, other times they go the old ways and fear silver or wolfsbane. Also, there was something different about Randy's curse as well. We as horror aficionados know that werewolves usually change with every full moon. Randy's transformations also typically occur during the full moon, although later episodes show that magic could influence them as well, making Randy's change a little complicated. Later in the episodes, we see her change come through magic as well. In the episode Voodoo Child, a villain used an effigy to force Randy to change. In another episode, Eclipse, a strange lunar eclipse blocked the wolf inside her. Now, since the wolf is right there in the title, you would expect Randy to turn into a werewolf every episode. I mean, that's logical, right? But you couldn't be more wrong, because Randy rarely turned into the full-fledged hairy monster she was. The budget was certainly a big reason for that. Also, the heavy suit was all sorts of wonky, with the snout too large or the legs looking weird. The second suit looked better in comparison, but that also came very close to Bigfoot's. So to cover the wolf action, or its lack of, every episode had a new monster. Every episode, Ian and Randy faced new mysterious creatures as they played the role of amateur supernatural detectives. At the time, the series received mixed reviews. The strongest suit of the series was the location of the early episodes. The first 14 episodes were shot overseas, which really helped in building the mythic feel of the show. Also, it gave the show an expensive feel. We see old universities, churches, and crypts, which give every London story a nice spooky vibe. Despite that, the tone was not dark in any sense. In fact, the show is closer to a romantic comedy than a horror. Randy and Ian, who was slightly older than her, had a striking chemistry and made the whole thing a pleasant watch. But just like all good things come to an end, the production of the show got messy. The British side of the funding ran out of money only after 14 episodes, and after that, the show completely changed direction. To cut down on its cost, many supporting characters were removed, and the final 6 episodes first aired under a different title, Love and Curses. And that made the situation all the more confusing. While few people see those episodes as a second season, others count the whole run as one season. Keeping all the production mess aside, She-Wolf of London might be the one werewolf show on the list that often forgot to bring the werewolf, but if given a chance, it was a lot smarter than people give it credit for. You just have to sink your teeth into it yourself to see. So in case you were convinced, I'm just going to drop the link to the series on YouTube in the description box. Wolf Lake, TV series 2001 to 2002. Long before Wolf Lake even had its pilot aired, the show had a dark cloud of uncertainty looming over it. While the viewers hadn't yet seen a werewolf transformation, behind the curtains everything was changing. The creator had left the show already, tweaks were added to attract young audiences, many cast members were removed and added, and by the time CBS's Wolf Lake aired, none of the scenes from the original pilot even made it into the premiere. But even before all these changes, Wolf Lake had pulled enough of a crowd and had real buzz around it. The production looked expensive. The cast was well represented, and on top of everything, it had a cool premise. The story followed Seattle detective John Cannon, who had just gotten engaged to his girlfriend Ruby. The couple's happy moment was short-lived when his fiancée was attacked viciously, and the only thing left behind was a severed hand. Later, following an anonymous tip, John learnt that someone saw Ruby in the town of Wolf Lake, and like any devoted man, John makes his way to the town of Wolf Lake, which is very aptly named if you see the show. But once he got there, John was only met with resistance at every turn by the people of the town. Nobody wanted to help, and everybody seemed to be hiding something. Oblivious to John, who had just walked into an unfamiliar town, many people in the town were werewolves. One of Wolf Lake's strengths was how it looked. Even though most of the part was shot in Vancouver, the show wove a story of a mysterious town with utmost conviction. The dialogues too really helped and complemented the secretive vibe that the show aimed for. Adding to that, the last 3 episodes were freaking great. John was so close to learning what the town of Wolf Lake was really up to. Meanwhile, the sheriff's daughter was on the verge of becoming a wolf. But before that, the show was cancelled, and we were left wanting more. The conflicts were not resolved. We never got to know how John dealt if and when he got to know he lived among beasts, or whether the sheriff's daughter did really join the werewolves. It's a real shame that the show ended way too early. It had strong actors, and many of them were quite good at their job than what we see in a lot of werewolf shows and films. Yes, Twilight, I'm looking straight at you. Only if Wolf Lake had come years later, when werewolves were TV regulars and trendy, maybe the whole story would have had a better shot. One thing I really appreciate about the show is how the show used Predator-style shooting to show us the world through the werewolf's eyes, and the targets as infrared prey. While it might have been an inspired technique, who cares? They did it fabulously. Wolf Lake also steered clear of the usual bloodbath and the body count of the Vampire Diaries, and instead focused more on the characters and relationships. Also, before Paul Wesley had found his footing on the Vampire Diaries, he played the role of Luke Cates here, a very green werewolf who was new to this whole world. So in a way, you could say this was a training ground for our ever charming Stefan Salvatore. In spite of the immense potential, CBS cancelled the series after airing only 5 episodes, while 9 episodes were produced out of those only 5 episodes ever aired. However, years later, the full run was aired on UPN in April and May of 2002. And so if you haven't checked out or even heard of the show, I do not blame you. It was never that popular and not exactly easy to find online as well, but I still do believe the show deserves another chance. The writers should pitch it again to the networks, and I'm sure any network would gladly pick it up. But for now, I will settle for whatever little we have of Wolf Lake that has survived online. Wolfblood, TV series 2012 to 2017. Wolfblood reminds us that not every werewolf show needs to be gory to have that palpable tension. Wolfblood aired between 2012 and 2017 and was created by Debbie Moon. It followed a changing cast of teenagers who were wolfbloods and could transform into wolves. The show dealt with kids hiding their secrets and dealing with every possible problem that came with living between two worlds. It ran for 5 seasons. However, the first 2 seasons are widely appreciated for their relatability and ease. The characters still had school that they had to suffer through, friends drama, puberty, and everything a teenager faced. It's just the wolf angle that's made these problems a lot more difficult than it was. The first season followed Maddie, played by Amy Kelly, and Rydian, played by Bobby Lockwood, who played 2 teenagers who on the surface were just like other teenagers. However, both of them harboured a secret. They were Wolfblood. Wolfbloods were people with wolf instincts and had heightened senses. They could transform into wolves while the full moon still had that strong hold on them. Kelly and Lockwood did a phenomenal job in selling those teen characters to us, and that is why, when Kelly left after season 2 and Lockwood at the end of season 3, fans of the series felt the show lost its soul. While the series still rates pretty decent ratings, fans could not shake off the feeling that something was amiss. Now, let me give it to you straight that if you plan on walking into the world of Wolfblood expecting it to be filled with terrifying monsters and people getting their intestines pulled out in every frame, you are in the wrong place. Because while Wolfblood has suspense and enough mystery that would keep you invested, it deliberately stayed away from becoming yet another kinda horror show. Also, can we take a moment and just appreciate how little attention the show gave to romance? That was a refreshing choice, by the way, because pick any supernatural teen drama and you've got everybody dating everybody. Wolfblood chose to keep the focus strictly on family and friendship, and I completely dig that decision. But that does not mean that the show shied away from or brushed off serious topics. It explored prejudice and social division without coming off as preachy, and underneath all the wolf power, there was actually plenty to think about. There were very few evil villains that were outright villainous. Humans were scared of the Wolfbloods because they feared what they did not understand. On the other hand, Wolfbloods wanted to protect their own for the same reason. The show won several awards over the years, including the Royal Television Society Award for Children's Drama in 2013. While it may never satisfy the hardcore horror fans in the house, it has built its own fan base across all age groups. After all, who wouldn't like a smart, family-friendly take on a werewolf with enough thoughtful themes to keep you invested all the way through? Dark Shadows TV series 1966 to 1971. Dark Shadows first aired on June 27, 1966, and was created and executive produced by Dan Curtis, the man closely associated with The Night Stalker and The Winds of War. The show dealt with Victoria Winters arriving at the eerie seaside town of Collinsport, Maine, to work for Elizabeth Collins Stoddard as a governess. She had come to Collinwood Mansion and taken up the job in the hope of finding some secrets buried in her past. Even with the unusual storyline, the ratings struggled, so the writers tried everything in their books. They brought ghosts, then a witch, and then a vampire. Barnabas Collins came to Collinwood claiming that he was a distant Collin relative from Europe, but he looked eerily similar to the portrait of his so-called great-grandfather, Barnabas Collins, that hung beside the mansion's front door. Eventually it was revealed that Barnabas and his 200-year-old ancestor were the same person, and he was actually a vampire. The rating went through the roof, and suddenly Dark Shadows was popular again. After a year or so, the writer needed something new other than the blood-sucking vampire. This time, it was a werewolf, and Quentin Collins was introduced. Quentin first appeared as a ghost, and his appearances were really creepy. He barely spoke and laughed like a complete maniac. At first, nobody knew who Quentin really was, but he wanted to control Collinwood so badly that he drove the Collins family out of their own estate. After months of haunting, the series pulled out its favourite trick from its bag. Much like Barnabas, we go back in time to 1897, where we finally learn about Quentin's origins. Quentin was the black sheep of the Collins family. He was selfish, arrogant, and had casual affairs with so many women that he truly never loved. Not only was he a complete jerk, but Quentin dabbled in black magic and the occult. Needless to say, life did not reward those decisions. Across the series, Quentin became a ghost, later a zombie, and eventually a werewolf. The lycanthropy curse also passed down to the firstborn male descendants in his bloodline. The curse forced Quentin to transform during every full moon, and once night fell, he hunted across the woods around Collinsport and killed people brutally. Later, he usually woke up with little or no memory of what happened. That shame piled up, and the ghosts of his victims tormented him until guilt finally took hold of him. But an interesting twist came when a painter drew Quentin's portrait and everything changed. During the full moon, Quentin stayed human while his painting transformed into a werewolf instead. On top of that, the painting began to age instead of Quentin. Decade after decade, Quentin's painting grew older, uglier in his place, while Quentin remained physically young. This was obviously inspired by Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, and it worked splendidly here. As long as that portrait survived, Quentin was in a way immortal and free from the werewolf curse. That's a pretty batshit crazy arc, but honestly, I have no qualms against it. The only thing that drove me nuts early on was the pacing. The story moved so slowly, and sometimes it took 2 full episodes, and still the conflict was headed nowhere. But trust me when I say this, the longer you watch the show, the pacing kinda grows on you. You see, television nowadays throws 20 twists at us before the episode ends. Take the very recent Netflix's I Will Find You. Those of you who have seen the show know what I'm talking about, and those who haven't watched it, please do yourself a favour and watch it. Anyway, I digress. So while today most shows come with their own plentiful twists, we forget half of them by the next episode, but Dark Shadows gives you 2 or 3 episodes to sit with a major revelation, and while that may not be everybody's cup of tea, and I understand, this gave the tension room to breathe without rushing to the next shock. So, if you are someone who needs instant gratification, this show might not be just for you. But if you enjoy slow burn storytelling, the show will reward you with both hands. Also, if you go in expecting extreme and graphic violence, nuh-uh, wrong show. You won't find any walls splattered with brains here. The only bone I have to pick is that the show was cancelled before its story could fully run its course, even though the final episode did provide some closing narration. Creator Dan Curtis admitted that he had run out of ideas and had exhausted all tropes from vampires to werewolves and had nothing new to offer. The decline in ratings also did not help the case, so in case you were planning on watching it, just be ready for that ending, or rather, lack of one. Being Human, TV series 2008 to 2013. Out of every show on this list, I think Being Human might actually be my favourite. I mean, who could have thought we could get a vampire, a werewolf, and a ghost all under one roof? Even though it ran for 5 seasons, Being Human later inspired an American remake with the same name. And yet the show remains underrated, and that's a real bummer because this one is an absolute gem. The story was fairly simple and followed 2 friends, Mitchell and George. Mitchell worked as a hospital cleaner, and George worked in the same hospital as a porter. These 2 20-somethings wanted exactly what every guy at their age wanted, and which was a few drinks, maybe a meet a girl, watch television, eat pizza on the couch, and complain about work. You know, the normal stuff. However, there was a teeny tiny problem. Mitchell happened to be a vampire, and George was a werewolf. I mean, like many of you watching this, the very first question that popped into my head was how come a vampire and a werewolf got along? Well, the shared struggle of controlling their respective animalistic urges created a friendship between Mitchell and George that overcame the rivalry between their kinds. The pair finally decided to rent a flat together and maybe for once try living like ordinary people. Basically, they wanted to be human. But it so happened that the flat they rented already had somebody living there. It was Annie Sawyer, and technically she was dead. Annie had been living with her boyfriend in the house before she died after falling off the stairs, and since then she's been a ghost who has haunted the house. Since Mitchell and George already belonged to the supernatural world, they could actually see and talk to her. And in no time, these three complete outsiders became a bizarre but wonderful dysfunctional family, and that's easily one of the best parts of the series. Each of them was struggling in their own way and carried personal baggage that nobody else around them could fully understand. Mitchell constantly fought the violent urge that pushed him toward blood, and George lived under the fear that his transformation might one day hurt somebody he loved. Annie was lonely and trapped between life and death, confused about why she was still on Earth. I thoroughly enjoyed how those supernatural problems closely mirrored real life. Mitchell's temptation to drink blood could be a metaphor for drug addiction, while George's management of his werewolf curse mimicked the fear of losing control. Well, Annie's loneliness and depression are something that mere mortals struggle with every day of their lives. The feeling of actually belonging somewhere made the character much easier to connect with, and honestly, who wouldn't relate to that? While Mitchell and Annie had their own journey, George too had it tough. And since this video is about werewolves, let's focus a little on George. George may be one of the most pitiful human werewolves on television. He grew claws, tore people, and occasionally woke up naked in places he had no business. And yet beneath all that fur and rage, George was an anxious, hopeless bloke, and all he wanted was a normal home and a girlfriend he could come back to. However, it was Russell Tovey's performance that made the character memorable. George could panic over every minor issue, and yet could muster up courage he didn't know he had whenever his friends needed him, and the bond between Mitchell and George formed the emotional core of the story. Both looked after each other and had each other's backs because frankly, nobody else could. If there is one show that you decide to add to your watch list, let this one be it because it's a deeply human story wrapped in a vampire, a werewolf, and a ghost who happen to share a rent tale. Bitten, 2014 to 2016. After multitudes of supernatural shows like Teen Wolf and The Vampire Diaries that focused on teen drama, Bitten came with a mature vibe to the world of werewolves and vampires. Even better, the show really focused on werewolves, and it was not merely a second plot to the main story. Another thing that really impressed me was that the female werewolves were actually given their due and rose above the archetypal status where the women mostly existed as the love interest of the male wolves. So the show earned a point right there for me. The series was based on Kelly Armstrong's Women of the Otherworld novels, with Bitten taking its title from the first book and took place across Toronto and upper New York State, and at the centre of it all was Alina Michaels, who begins the series as the world's only known female werewolf. Alina has walked away from her wolf life and left her pack and werewolf ex-fiancé behind in New York. Here in Toronto, she was trying to build a normal life for herself as a photographer, while her very human boyfriend knew absolutely nothing about her real identity, until a rogue werewolf began slaughtering humans. This naturally brought police attention, and with it the biggest danger of all, exposure to the human world. Alina soon received a phone call from the pack leader who asked her to come home. Alina was now forced to return to a life she tried so hard to leave behind, and to the man, Clay, her ex-fiancé, who gave her the curse to begin with. Personally, I think the first season handled everything really well. The story moved at a comfortable pace, and I actually cared for these people. There was plenty of werewolf action too, which, sounds like a very reasonable thing to expect from a werewolf series. But then seasons 2 and 3 happened. Every storyline that existed in the story happened all at once. Major conflicts, unexpected reveals, people dying left, right and centre, it never seemed to stop. There were many good ideas in the mix, but since everything came one after another, the ideas did not simmer long enough and did not have the same impact they should have. I really wish the series had slowed down a little and given the characters the space to talk and grow. In my opinion, Laura Vandervoort was easily the strongest actor in the entire show. She brought life to the character, and well, the fact that she looked fantastic certainly did not hurt either. However, my one complaint with her would be that she is always speaking in a raspy, whispery voice. I mean, come on, nobody talks like that. The voice was completely off-putting because that hushed, monotone delivery made Alina come across far more fragile than the role really cared for. It kind of took away the fierceness and made her sound delicate. Another complaint was that the show was about werewolves, so why did they spend so much time staying human? Season 1 had ample transformations, so no complaints there. Personally, I felt Seasons 2 and 3 used them much less. Now, despite the slight shortcomings here and there, which can surely be overlooked because, well, I nitpick, there are plenty of things I enjoyed. You could practically feel the chemistry between Clay and Alina as soon as they entered the room together. The romance is pretty explicit, if you know what I mean, and there are plenty of intimate scenes, bare skin that is mature for a teen audience, so that's a heads up for you guys in case you were planning on watching it with a younger sibling around. Another thing I really appreciate is that the show didn't try hard to sell it as another Canadian production pretending to be American. While Bitten was proudly Canadian and was filmed in Canada, it had an eye for detail and convincingly passed for Upper New York State. So that's it on the strange cult of werewolf TV. While these shows may not have gotten their due credit in time, each show on the list found a different reason for the werewolf curse to work. I feel werewolf TV shows actually have a much tougher job than people give them credit for. No, think about it for a second. Werewolves are already in the corner because their traits and transformation have been well defined to us for ages. Most werewolves turn every full moon and lose control. We know about them so much already that it hardly leaves any space for any horror that the audience might be interested in watching for 5 seasons. So every successful werewolf series has to bend the rules a little, and that is why they are so difficult to pull off. And these 8 shows were somewhat successful in doing so because while they bend the old mythology to serve their story, they never lost sight of the snarling beast at the centre of it all. Maybe not snarling as we saw George in Being Human, but you get my drift. So, if you enjoyed this list, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment with the werewolf series you think deserves more love. And if you want more forgotten horror TV, cult monster shows, or underrated supernatural gems, stay close, because we have plenty more where this came from.